last but not least, I am so pleased to welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads, Roshini Rajkumar, who is a strategic communication and crisis coach to C-suite executives. She hosts Real Talk with Roshini on WCCO Radio in Minnesota and Real Leaders with Roshini podcast, which can be found on your favorite podcast app. She's also a licensed attorney, former TV reporter, and someone that media like yours truly across the country asked to comment on leadership, crisis management, political strategy, and PR blunders. Her book, Communicate That, is in its 3rd edition, and she joins us now. Roshini Rajkumar, happy Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you.
May the 4th be with you. I also am a big Star Wars fan like you. It's definitely a special day in galaxies far and wide.
So I have to say, because Nathan and I did this before, you're a Catholic as I'm a Catholic, so say May the 4th be with you again. Say it again.
May the 4th be with you.
And with your spirit. So that's sort of the Catholic response. See, I'm totally nerding out today.
Exactly.
Like, this is a wacky edition of the program, but hey, we're having fun on this Monday, May the 4th.
Well, most of us couldn't go to Mass on Sunday, so, this is the next best thing.
I wouldn't go there, but I guess so. I think the next best thing is probably watching Mass on YouTube. But how are you doing amidst everything, all the craziness going on?
I'm doing pretty well. It's one of those times where I just got off a call with someone, and she was asking me the same thing. I said, it's one of those times that I have to take my own strategic communication advice, apply it to my world, to my business. And if I didn't, I'd go crazy, I'd go under. So, it's a real good time to put the skills that I teach others of pivoting into play, because all of us are pivoting all around the country to keep our worlds going, to keep our businesses going, and our families going.
And what is it in particular from the advice that you give to clients that's most keeping you composed and in control and focused with your eye on the ball?
I try to look at this as an opportunity versus a crisis or a challenge. We are in a crisis. That is absolutely the case. But if you look at it as an opportunity, then you can rely on all of your natural gifts and talents, whether that is for good communication, or maybe it's creativity, or maybe you're able to get a lot done on a dime. All of those things are gifts and talents you bring to the table now, and they're needed even more so in this time of needing to pivot if we want to move forward and be successful. So look at this as a time to stretch new brain cells, to give yourself some grace, but to definitely pivot in a beautiful way. And I hope, and I have a feeling, you will end up on the other side in a stronger position.
Roshini Rajkumar, one of the topics that we've been hitting on a lot recently, and I touched on it earlier when I did my monologue on what lessons we can learn from Star Wars about the concentration of power in the hands of limited or few government officials. Civil liberties are under attack in so many different ways across the country right now. I know you and I had gotten into a little bit of a discussion about this last time you were here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, and I'm wondering what you make of the discussion right now. You have a lot of pushback against governments in a variety of different states because they're closed down, but also some of the civil liberties that many Americans perceive to be under attack are very sacrosanct and truly important ones. We've seen the governor of New Jersey a few weeks ago on Tucker Carlson's show on Fox News. He basically said, he's not paying attention to the Bill of Rights right now. There's a crisis afoot. Now, I'm paraphrasing and sort of just compiling what he said into one quick sentence, but that's the sentiment we seem to be getting. Where do you, especially as an attorney, someone who cares about the Constitution and civil liberties, where do you assess things as being at right now?
Yeah, I love the Constitution. And you know what? One of the things that makes the United States different from many countries, if not most, in the world is we do not forget about the Bill of Rights, especially in times of crisis. We don't forget about them. Obviously, there are times we can be a little more flex with enforcement, a little more lax about enforcement, but we can't simply let weeks and months go by with people living with rules that come down in a lot of cases from just one person, in many states, meaning governors' executive orders. So certainly we want to be safe. We want our fellow citizens to be safe, but there is never a time time to short skirt the Bill of Rights. And I feel so strongly about that. It is what has guided this country. It's guided the courts. It's guided leaders of days gone by. It needs to guide leaders in current time.
And how well do you think our leaders are actually abiding by that? I mean, we know that in a lot of states across the country, probably a majority, you can't really go to church, for example, and exercise that aspect of freedom of religion. There's also pushback against these gatherings. I think there have been some arrests for people who have been trying to put on rallies and gathering together with people in violation of social distancing rules. And the list goes on for other things that we have seen that seem to be violations of individual rights. The question is, are we finding a balance, or is the weight much more in government's authority to deal with a crisis, and not necessarily to hell with the Bill of Rights, but to hell with parts of the Bill of Rights, shall we say?
Well, I have a deep knowledge of what's happening in Minnesota, and I have been surveying what's happening around the country. I don't see any governors that are getting a 10 when it comes to the Bill of Rights. I do feel, though, that the citizens allow their governmental officials to push them one way or another. So I applaud citizens who want to protest. Hopefully they're doing it in a respectful manner. But even those social distancing rules, those are guidelines and rules. In most states, they are not laws that have been made by the legislature. And it doesn't mean I'm not wanting people to go out into the streets and try to purposely infect each other with different diseases. That's not what we're getting into. But we were built on peaceful protest. We were built on the ability to exercise our right to gather, to contradict, to challenge what government is doing. And then journalists, media, the reporters among us, which I am not anymore, are really supposed to question every branch of government and what it's doing. And what I'm finding and seeing, unfortunately, many times on social media, is that citizens or other government officials are challenging reporters from asking the tough questions. There's simply no place for that. We need to allow journalists to do their job, and we also need to let legislators and legislatures in every state hold their governors accountable. And we need to support them, and we need to ask and send in information and send in those texts or tweets or emails to our respective legislators so that they can then deliver those messages to the governor. And it's some support in holding the governors accountable.
I think that's very well said and so true. But one thing that's been disturbing has been the participation of many Americans in these kinds of things with snitching. Snitch lines, as they've been called in some states and cities, have been set up, and people have actually been calling them and basically ratting out their neighbors for not following certain guidelines and whatnot. And that gets concerning. You have some towns where they've been using drones to monitor people and whether or not they're following social distancing guidelines. States like Colorado, where I'm broadcasting from, have been using metadata and whatnot from cell phones to figure out how effective their policies have been. Now, you might think, oh, this seems good because we need to protect the interests of the people, that is to say, protect the safety from this virus and what have you. But as we've been talking about a lot on this show, you run significant dangers when you just start accepting government amassing this kind of authority, whether state or local or federal, in a crisis like this.
Jimmy, to the snitches, I say, get a hobby. I mean, really, is that the best thing you have to do right now is rat out your neighbors? It does not build community. It does not grow goodwill. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. If people are so concerned what other people are doing, I say to those people, you don't have enough going on in your life. Find a hobby, learn a new skill, watch some webinars, watch Jimmy at the Crossroads. Don't be out there snitching on people. It's only going to come back and bite you in the wrong place.
That advice to watch Jimmy at the Crossroads, Roshini, I got to tell you, that was the best one that you listed in there. But good.
Yeah, you got to put that in one of your opens or one of your ads.
Oh, for sure. No, that's for sure. I do want to put up one quote because we were talking about this last week on Thursday. This judge in Michigan, Judge Christopher Murray of Michigan's Court of Claims, in upholding Governor Whitmer, her executive order that was really expansive. He said this, put it up on the screen, Nathan. Those liberty interests are and always have been subject to society's interests, society being our fellow residents. Now, I understand that you will have some elements of government where your rights are not maximal, especially if you trample upon somebody else's rights. But I read that and further comments that he made in his decision as being individual rights are subordinate to the idea of society's interests as somehow determined, not just by government as in, say, the legislature, even deliberative bodies, but by a governor single-handedly making these sorts of decisions. And that, I think, is fundamentally dangerous, especially when it's upheld by the courts with that kind of attitude.
Well, we have this concept of minority rights in our country. It's built into our Constitution. It is why there are 2 senators for every state, regardless of the state's population. It's so that the majority doesn't go over and inflict or infect the majority, right? The minority. So at the end of the day, if the minority voice is just the governor of a state, that gets a little crazy. It gets a little more despotic. And I'm not calling our governors despots, but they were supposed to be challenged by the legislature. That is why we have 3 branches of government. So I want to respect what governors are doing, and the idea that society's overall interests should be upheld over maybe smaller numbers of people, but never because of reasons that are coming down in a unilateral fashion. It is why we have legislators, or in the case of cities, city councils, to check the role of the mayor. And, you pick your body of government and you can find that same analogy. So I just think there needs to be more transparency. We're also looking at time elements, Jimmy. When a governor places an executive order, it's usually, or emergency powers, exercises emergency powers, usually it's for a limited duration of time. In many states, we are now approaching 2 months. Nobody would tell you 2 months is a limited duration of time, especially when we're in this pandemic. And especially when you see various states opening up to various degrees. Even here in the state of Minnesota, about 130,000 employees have gone back to work since last week. And a lot of that is in non-customer facing industries, but you also have more and more businesses offering curbside service. Another concept in our Constitution is that laws should not be arbitrary and capricious. And I am seeing a lot of arbitrary rules, not even laws, but rules that governors and others and neighbors are expecting us to live by. And that's just not what's written into our Constitution.
No, absolutely not. And I do want to reference, and I went through this in the beginning, but your point is so apropos of what I was saying before, when in Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, Chancellor Palpatine gets some emergency powers, and he says that the powers you've given me, I will lay down when this crisis has abated. Lo and behold, several years later, not only does he continue to have those powers, but he amasses powers as an emperor. And we need to learn that sort of lesson from not just our history and the world history, but from Star Wars history as well. So I want to go to the messaging side of things, though. Roshini Rajkumar is a strategic communications and crisis coach. Get your thoughts on this. President Trump had been for weeks doing daily press conferences with the coronavirus task force, and sometimes would get into real tussles with the media back and forth, and it seems more about Trump versus the media than anything else. But I want to play a clip here. This is cut 12. It's from Saturday. And this is just an example of the new press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, who was formerly of the Trump 2020 campaign and of the Republican National Committee. She's now the press secretary and is doing regular press briefings, which the Trump administration had gotten rid of for well over a year. And it's just her now. Take a look.
We act in good faith. We want to provide these witnesses when they are requested. We want to make sure that it is, one, the right timing, because these experts do have day jobs that are very important to keeping the American people safe and healthy. In addition to that, we want to make sure that the subject matter of the hearing matches the individual they're requesting. Of course, we have different subject matter experts in all of our coronavirus task force briefings. And in this case, Chairman Lowy had reached out to the Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, who who I just spoke with before coming out here, and he had asked repeatedly for what the subject matter of this hearing would be, and it was a subcommittee hearing on HHS funding, which would have been a bit peculiar to have the NIH director who's under Secretary Azar and HHS. Exactly. So
that's a snippet of Kayleigh McEnany. She was asked a question about why the Trump administration doesn't want Dr. Fauci to testify at a hearing. But I just wanted to show an example of one person, very composed, knows what she's doing. I was impressed watching Friday's longer press conference, nearly an hour. She did a great job for her first time, and I think this is the approach they need to take. What do you make of sort of this change in communication tactics of the Trump administration, Roshini Rajkumar?
Yeah, this was a smart move. Should have come a lot earlier.
Yeah.
You can see all of the subtextual messages. She's wearing a cross on a necklace. I mean, so many different things, Jimmy, that are said in just that individual photo of her with the flags in the background. She is very tight on message. She says things that are smart. And I'm not making a content judgment on that. It's just her delivery is smooth. And she looks good. I mean, much easier on the eyes than President Trump. And she's not going to put herself in a position where she's putting her foot in her mouth, which is often what President Trump would do. So this is a good move. You can do it daily. You can do it weekly. You can do it whenever you need to. But I have always strongly felt that President Trump shouldn't be out there. And now that we are a couple months, if not going on 3 months, into certain emergencies in different parts of the country, Dr. Fauci does not need to be out there every time. It made sense in the first week to 10 days of this crisis that each of the different department heads or Dr. Fauci was out there. But certainly now it's your press secretary. That's about all you need, unless it's some sort of breaking news, very new development that one of those other figures wants to be attached to.
Again, Roshini Rajkumar, our guest. Just for a few minutes left, let's talk about and shift gears to Joe Biden and the allegations presented against him by Tara Reade, who says that in 1993, when she was a Senate staffer, she was sexually assaulted by him. In Cut 9 on Friday, Joe Biden, of course, Democratic nominee in waiting for President of the United States, he was on Morning Joe with Mika Brzezinski and asked about this. And specifically, I want to first play the clip where he denies the allegations. Take a listen.
So the former Senate aide accuses you of sexual assault. And please, to our viewers, please excuse the graphic nature of this, but I want to make sure that there is no question as to what we're talking about. She says in 1993, Mr. Vice President, that you pinned her against the wall and reached under her clothing and penetrated her with your fingers. Would you please go on the record with the American people? Did you sexually assault Tara Reade?
No, it is not true. I'm saying unequivocally, it never happened. And it didn't. It never happened.
Do you remember her? Do you remember any types of complaints that she might have made?
I don't remember any type of complaint she may have made. It was 27 years ago. And I don't remember, nor does anyone else that I'm aware of. And the fact is that I don't remember. I don't remember any complaint ever having been made.
There's one other clip I'm going to want to get your reaction to from that interview, Roshini Rajkumar, but what did you make of his denial answer there in the interview from Friday on MSNBC?
I really didn't think it was very smooth, Jimmy. And, I've kind of studied it a little since it happened. There was a little bit of Clinton 1998 Monica Lewinsky-esque to this response, and the unequivocal word that he uses in there. He just doesn't sound very human in talking about it and saying, I don't think anyone remembers. I mean, I think you have to have a little deeper answer than that. And maybe even some sort of I don't know what I would have done to make her feel this way. If he truly did not do this, I think he also still needed to acknowledge her in some way that was a human level sort of response.
Yeah, I wonder if when they were talking about how they were going to have him address this among the campaign leadership, if basically they just wanted to keep a very simple message because, quite frankly, Joe Biden struggles to put coherent sentences together. And so they wanted to just short and sweet to the point, basically just say, well, not very sweet, but say, I deny it unequivocally and just be very clear there, but not add in some more flowery stuff.
Yeah, I can see advisors saying something like that. I would not have advised that. Anytime you use the word unequivocal, I think you start to look a little shady. I mean, it's
Sure.
just one of those words that has a negative subtextual message, and it's just because of how that word's been used over the last couple decades.
Let's play cut 10 here. This is Mika pressing Joe Biden on his comments in the past about Christine Blasey Ford, who, of course, was the first accuser, the most prominent one, the one who testified before the United States Senate on Senate Judiciary Committee against Brett Kavanaugh last fall of 2018.
But, Mr. Vice President, as it pertained to Dr. Ford, everyone wanted, high-level Democrats said she should be believed, that they believed it happened. You said if someone like Dr. Ford were to come out, the essence of what she is saying has to be believed, has to be real.
No.
Why?
No, what I said, it has to be.
Why is it real for Dr. Ford but not for Tara Reade?
Because the facts are that, look, I'm not suggesting she had no right to come forward. And I'm not saying any woman, they should come forward. They should be heard. And then it should be investigated. It should be investigated. And if there's anything that is consistent with what's being said, and she makes the case or the case is made, then it should be believed. But ultimately, the truth matters. The truth matters. It's period. I fought my entire life to change the whole notion of the law and the cultural around the culture around sexual assault. And I fought to strengthen and protect the process for survivors. I believe that we've come a long way, and we have a long way to go in this system before we, in fact, are in a position that there's a fair and unbiased view. But at the end of the day, it has to be looked at. These claims are not true. There's no cooperation. I mean, they're not true.
Mr. Vice President,
I don't know what else I can say to you.
Notice there how Joe Biden, a couple times in a row, said the truth matters, which is one of the catchphrases that Democrats are using. These facts matter, truth matters, this matters, that matters. Anything that whenever they're trying to present a point, they say this matters, and I'm the one who owns that. I own the truth. What did you make of that response, which I didn't find very compelling, especially because also of how the Obama administration would handle Title IX guidance for sexual assault matters on college campuses and what have you? He has a very different tune now for himself from what he was saying Kavanaugh or when he was blasting Education Secretary Betsy DeVos for changing guidelines on Title IX for college campuses across the country. And then also, what did you make of Mika Brzezinski and how she handled that interview?
Yeah, so Mika really pulled a fast one on him. I mean, that's an interesting side-by-side, back-to-back question she went with. I would say this response from Joe Biden had a little more meat in it than the previous clip you played, Jimmy. But here's the thing. If someone is accused of something, like let's say you were in this exact situation, you're accused of something. If it truly did not happen, you would show maybe some anger in your face that anyone could be accusing you of this. There's so many different ways you'd react if something truly didn't happen. And this response that you just showed us shows that he was really trying to get the right words out there. I think if he had reordered his response, like started by talking about all the work he's done over decades to, as he says, bring sexual harassment and sexual assault claims forward, helping women to do those kinds of things. I think if he would have started with that and then wound into what he's being accused of, it would have been a much more natural and believable response. So you have to sort of watch different kinds of leaders and different politicians. Are they sounding too canned, especially when something of this nature, such a terrible nature he is being accused of? The human in you, like think of any time in your life you have been accused of something you didn't do, and that reaction is very natural, right? You're not trying to be canned.
Well, let me just say one thing, and then I'd love your thoughts on Mika Brzezinski. But Brett Kavanaugh, in his denials before the United States Senate, was very strong in his emotions, showing his anger, showing his anguish. And some folks in the media and Democrats were using that as an example to say, oh, he's guilty. So maybe Joe Biden had it in his mind, oh, I can't show that anger and emotion because if I do, then there might be that sort of perception or something. I don't know. But I found
remember
yeah.
you and I spoke right after Kavanaugh's opening statement, and when we both gave him points for having human emotion and being absolutely ticked off that he was accused of these things. And I do remember it came down out into the outside world along party lines. Democrats thought he looked bad. Republicans thought he really took power over the situation and defended himself well. With pure messaging, I liked his approach because I think it showed the human side, that he was appalled of what he was being accused of doing. It's a really fine line. And no matter what your messaging, if you have a history with the people, which Vice President Joe Biden does, that does come into it. And throughout the 2020 campaign, which got cut short because of COVID-19, we saw a lot of bumbling and fumbling by Joe Biden. You and I talked about that on your show many times. So this is not something of this very touchy nature that I expect he's going to all of a sudden have some rock star response without like a meteor hitting and a miracle happening. I wouldn't give him very high marks on this response.
Now, how about just real quickly, and I appreciate we're having you longer than anticipated, Mika Brzezinski, how do you think she handled that interview? The only thing that I would say that struck me as downside for how she was doing this was that she didn't actually talk about how Joe Biden, there's more corroboration for this than there was ever for Brett Kavanaugh. For example, she told her brother, she told a friend, her mother was told, her mother even called in to CNN's Larry King Live. We've played that video before. And also a few years later, she told a neighbor about what had happened. Now, you didn't have any of that kind of stuff for any of the accusers that were up against Brett Kavanaugh at the time. And yet Mika didn't make a point when talking about Kavanaugh and saying there's this difference. Doesn't mean that gives any indication that Joe Biden is any more or less guilty than Brett Kavanaugh, but it means that there was at least more support. There is more support for this from a corroboration. Yes, she at least has been consistent for decades with her story than there was for any of Kavanaugh's accusers.
So Tara Reade's call from the mother, especially because the mother has passed, would have a bit of a chain of custody evidentiary problem if this were a court of law.
Of course.
But yes, it does seem like this situation has a lot more corroboration than the Brett Kavanaugh situation did. I'm a little surprised. I haven't studied every part of Mika's interview with him. I'm a little surprised she didn't bring that up at that point, because that actually would have been a stronger position for her to come from in asking Joe Biden that question.
Well, it was a lengthy interview, nearly 20 minutes long, so there are a lot of other pieces we could certainly digest and divvy up here with you, Roshini Rajkumar, but I think we'll call it a conversation for now. I'm sure we will have you back soon. It's always so great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us today on the program.
Thanks, Jimmy. We covered a lot of ground for sure. May the 4th be with you.
And with your spirit. Thank you, Roshini Rajkumar. Great to have you again. Check out her website, ownyourwow.com. And, of course, her book, Communicate That, Your Toolbox for a Powerful Presence. Always just fantastic insights from Roshini Rajkumar joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Thanks for watching this clip from Jimmy at the Crossroads. You do not want to miss a minute of engaging, intelligent talk. Subscribe today to the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel, and you'll be sure to catch our live broadcast. I appreciate your support.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.